in the back. Unless you have back problems, come forward, inshallah. تقدموا إلى الأمام. تقدموا إلى الأمام. Come closer. Let's see who has back problems. I still see some athletes on the back wall, so they definitely don't have back problems. Ta'al, come closer, come closer. We don't bite. Come closer to each other. Ya Rab, Bismillah. Yalla, Ridwan, do the work you do on Jum'ah. Push them forward here. Alright, inshallah we'll get started. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم بارك لنا في جمعنا هذا. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مباركا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا ولا معنا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم انا نسألك البركة في أعمالنا وفي أعمالنا وفي أرزاقنا وفي أهلنا وذوينا وأحبابنا. اللهم اجعل لنا من كل ضيق مخرجا ومن كل هم فرجا. اللهم اجعل لنا من بعد العسر يسرا. دبر لنا فإننا لا نحسن التدبير وقدر لنا فإننا لا نحسن التقدير. بارك اللهم لنا في أيام ذي الحجة. اللهم بارك لنا في أيام ذي الحجة ولياليه. اللهم اكتبنا في هذه الأيام من عبادك المقبولين. اللهم ارزقنا حج بيتك الحرام وزيارة قبر نبيك عليه الصلاة والسلام. اللهم أعد هذه الأيام المباركة علينا والأمة في خير وعافية. اللهم فك الكرب عن أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. فك الكرب عن كل مكروب وفك البلاء عن كل مبتلى. اللهم كن لعبادك المستضعفين في سوريا وفي فلسطين وفي العراق وفي بورما وفي كشمير وفي مصر وفي اليمن وفي سائر بلاد المسلمين. أنت أعلم بهم منا. كن لهم ناصرا ومعينا ومؤيدا وظهيرا. Oh Allah, we call upon you, we pray to you, we beseech you, we ask you by your names and attributes to bless this gathering and to surround it with your angels and to shower it with your mercy. Oh Allah, we ask you to guide us to understanding our deen, to fill our hearts with enlightenment and fill our hearts with nur, fill our hearts with your abundant mercy and fill our homes with your abundant mercy. Guide us to your pleasure. Make us of those steadfast upon truth. Make us of those steadfast upon truth. Allow us to see truth as truth is and bless us to follow it. And allow us to see falsehood as falsehood is and bless us to avoid it. Oh Allah, we ask you of those who are able to, who are enabled to navigate through the difficulties of our times, the trials, the misconceptions, the shahawat and the shubuhat, and those who remain steadfast upon La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, until we meet you and you're pleased with us. Oh Allah, make the best of our days, the last of our days, the best of our actions, the last of our actions, the best day of all the day that we meet you and you are pleased with us. Oh Allah, we ask you to bless us with your love and the love of your Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the love of every person and believer you love. Oh Allah, we ask you to make that as means for our salvation in our dunya and our akhirah. Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Amma ba'd, jazakumullah khair for being with us for the Friday Forum today. This is the Friday Forum in the blessed month of Dhul Hijjah. Tonight is the third night of the month of Dhul Hijjah. Of course, we know that the days in the Arabic calendar, or in the Islamic calendar, I should say, start with Maghrib. So now the third night began, right? We just finished the second day, and we pray that we're of those who show reverence to these days and take advantage of them in the best way possible. Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen. We have a very important subject for today, and I'm going to pass it over to Akhi Ahmad Jad to get the subject started, give you guys an idea of what the Friday Forum is, and inshallah we'll explain today's topic and the first installment of this series, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. So if those of you who haven't been at the Friday Forum before, it's based off of what the Community Hub was in the past. The idea is to have a place on Friday night for this age group, the young adults group, 20s, 30s, 40s, not so young adults, to be able to have a place here and be able to, one, socialize, and two, to be able to talk about issues that we think are important to us here. This is now targeted and geared towards more the young adults crowd. It's not geared towards little kids with the families and everything as much, so it is more geared towards if you are in the young adults age, this is the place we hope that you want to be on Friday night at the masjid, inshallah. And then I think as far as this series, so I guess I'll start by explaining the series a little bit. So I think we know that why we're talking about LGBT is based on, it was inspired by the situation that there's Pride Month going on. We could talk about that. But we thought that this series in general of gender and gender identity might be important. So Shaykh, you're going to probably, I'm sure, expand on this more. But from my view, part of it is, I think one of the topics besides just LGBT is this whole gender and gender identity topics are issues that those of us in this age group dealing here in the West, in America specifically, are seeing what can seem like sometimes a clash between our way of life and the other way of life. We're trying to understand how to manage and deal with it and how to understand our religion with the situation that we're in today. So we figured it could be important to talk about this in a broad, in many sessions, in many different topics. Today, just being focused a little bit more on the LGBT.
Can you lift it up a little bit?
Okay, can you hear me better now? Okay, sorry. And by the way, I do want to say, if you're not particularly interested in gender and gender identity, this is not going to be a consistent series every single week. We are still going to switch it back, but this is a series that might not go in order, but we will come back to it in general. But we do think, I think everyone's interested in this topic. We're all dealing with it and thinking about it every day nowadays. So, Shaykh, I guess I'll turn to you and ask you how you feel about why this series and why this particular episode 1 in the series.
Jazakallah khair, barakallah feek. I just want to remind everyone, you know, the reason why it was called the Friday Forum first, you know. I guess forum is basically an area where you exchange ideas and where there's some interaction between, you know, thoughts, understandings, you know, and that's what we're hoping this would be. We want it to be a little bit more interactive. That's why we got the number here. We're talking about current issues. I think they matter to pretty much anyone who's living in our society, especially in, you know, experiencing all that we're experiencing. So we want to hear from you. Your opinion, your comments, your questions, they're appreciated. They'll enrich the discussion. You know, you could text this number here, I'll get it automatically. And if, you know, at any point we see it relevant in our discussion, Akhi Ahmed will jump in and add it, inshallah. So that's the whole idea behind the Friday Forum. And, you know, I guess, you know, just to add, you know, how many of you guys have seen the flyer? You guys seen the flyer? Anyone paid attention to the flyer? Who didn't pay attention to the flyer and just heard about the program other ways? Some people, all right. If you look at the flyer, you see on the front, what do you see on the front of the flyer? What does it look like?
Rainbow?
It's not a rainbow. No. You did not see the flyer. Huh? Just so you know, it's the picture of the masjid. So if you see it, looks like a building. You guys have our Facebook page or something? Or you guys didn't see the flyer? So anyway, it's the Friday Forum. We use the same template every time. That picture is a picture of ICPC-Clifton, just so you know. That's the idea behind the flyer that we're using. Anyway, getting into the subject here, you know, a series on gender and gender identity. You know, I guess this is just as hot a topic as any, because I think, you know, there's like a whole host of issues that relate to the subject of gender and gender identity. This time we're talking about Islam and LGBTQ+, and that's because of Pride Month. But there are other subjects, you know, like that we could talk about in this series about gender roles and gender politics, right? That's one. Transgenderism. What's transgenderism? Who are transgender people? You know, and another subject is the guidelines to interaction between men and women. You know, does there need to be a need? What are the boundaries that Islam put in place, and why? You know, What is haya and modesty? How has Islam allowed us to express ourselves, through our dress and dress code and that whole idea? These are different subjects that, are often asked about and often misunderstood. And we want to give an opportunity to try to go through these one by one and see if anyone has any objections, misconceptions, a little bit of confusion about the subject. So, you guys have all heard of Pride Month? You guys all heard of Pride Month? If you heard of Pride Month, raise your hand. You've heard of it? Okay. We've been getting a lot of questions because especially now, there is increased pressure, in our schools and workplaces as well, where people, are expected to do certain things that show that they somehow approve and recognize Pride Month, right? So what is Pride Month, historically? I don't know if you looked into this at all, Akhi Ahmed.
I haven't, no.
But, basically, it's not something that has a long history, because the LGBTQ movement itself doesn't have a very long history. It's actually only been recognized by the past few presidents, since Clinton onward. Clinton, and they also mention Obama and Trump, and also President Biden. It hasn't been recognized much before that, because the dynamic that we're in right now is actually one that is very, very new, relatively speaking, in terms of the general acceptance of this movement on every level, in terms of school, politics, and the public sphere as a whole, sort of shifted its take, big time in the past 20 years, you could say. The rhetoric has fundamentally changed about the subject, and we're going to discuss parts of that, but more importantly, there are some different points I want to go through together, and I want to give you guys a chance to ask, how should I view this issue from an Islamic standpoint, right? Are there people within our Muslim community that have this type of struggle? How should I view that? How should we deal with that if someone has a struggle, where they feel attracted to the same gender? Is the desire itself something sinful, or is acting upon it something sinful? What's the difference? Is there a difference between the two? Are homosexual tendencies something natural? If so, then how's that? What's our belief on what is natural? What is fitrah? That concept of fitrah and natural design. Why should I define my identity by sexual orientation? It's another question. How much does self-control and controlling desires play into this subject? Whether we're talking about homosexuality or another type of shahwa and desire. Is it wrong for me to quote-unquote be judgmental of what people choose for themselves? If everyone chooses for themselves, why should it matter to me? These are often common questions that are asked by many people. What issues do we have with how this issue is being proliferated and pushed upon society as a whole? That's another point of discussion. Is it okay for me to celebrate something, or I guess encourage something that my deen fundamentally prohibits? How do I deal with that when it comes to politics and Muslim politicians and so on and so forth? There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm sure we're not going to be able to discuss everything, but I'm just trying to, stir the pot a little bit, and maybe perhaps it'll, guide us to, some fruitful discussion, inshallah. I guess a good point to start too is, what does the acronym stand for? LGBTQ and plus.
Plus, yeah.
So they say that, okay, so what does the L stand for? Lesbian, all right. G, all right. B, bisexual. You guys all know what that bisexual means, basically attracted to both genders, right? LGBT, transgenders. Q, queer or questioning. Queer or questioning. What does Q mean? Queer or questioning, meaning I'm not sure. I'm like sort of experimenting. And what does the plus mean? The plus basically refers to, there's a lot of confusion about the issue of gender now. They say that, when it comes to gender identity and what's your pronoun, they're starting to ask this question in schools all the time, as a form of being respectful. You got to ask the person, what's your pronoun, And so, there's a whole lot of other gender identities. And that just shows how confused people are about their sexuality. So that's what the acronym stands for. Transgenders, we're going to discuss that another day. So I'm not going to really get into that, but I'm going to be focusing, I guess, on the movement in general. So I guess that's the acronym. What do you have to add, Akhi Ahmed?
No, I think it's a good start, and yeah, you gave me a lot of good ideas to try to take the discussion. Yeah, that's a lot of topics to try to take on tonight, though. But I guess one thing I'll just think about too in the future, obviously not tonight, but for the plus, I think one of the very interesting things that probably haven't been discussed too much from a standpoint of view is I think what they call it's either gender non-binary or gender neutral. Basically, they don't have a attraction period, and that I think that's one of the big ones for the plus too, right? It's just that there's just so many different ways that they're identifying themselves, right? Okay, so I think anyway then we can get into it. And by the way, again, if no one knows, sometimes Shaykh Osamah has another Shaykh like Shaykh Yes or something like that. Sometimes he does like this, where I am not a scholar in any way, no formal training or nothing. I'm representing the community. So definitely feel free to ask questions. Coming here, I'm here to ask and represent the community's point of view, what we want to have the Shaykh talk about. I think the Quran is a good place to start at if you want to not go there right away. But I think talk about what does the Quran say about the issue is a good start. So I guess does that make sense? A good start?
Sure.
Okay. So I tried to understand what it's talking about. So first of all, I'm sure you've heard this before, but like in the common folk, you'll hear people say sometimes the Quran doesn't say anything explicitly about homosexuality. They actually, that is actually said in the non-scholarly community a lot. So I pulled all the verses that I could about it, or some of them. So I see there's a lot of verses about the story of Qawm Lut, and I think everyone here knows that story, at least the broad strokes. The only other verse I could see that they say could be is that verse in Surah An-Nisa, verse 16, which I would like to ask you about if you'd be interested in it. But other than that, and then something in relation to Qawm Lut, is there any other areas in the Quran that mentions this topic?
So look, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Obviously, treading into this issue, it's a very sensitive subject because, sometimes people struggle with certain things. You'd be surprised, by the way. You'd be surprised how common this struggle is within our community, where certain people, they just don't find themselves attracted to the opposite gender. And, that may be for one reason or another. There's a big discussion that we could have about that, about what people expose themselves to and how social dynamics affect people's sexuality in general. What social conditioning, we discussed this in a recent talk, basically what people are trained to be accepting of and inclined towards, right? That gets to the whole subject of the, education and how it's being proliferated there, and shows and movies and, again, superstars and celebrities and politicians. And all of this causes a certain social conditioning that people are prone to accept certain things that they would not even have thought of perhaps a few decades ago, just because of the different social dynamics. Now, but getting to what the Quran says, to what end exactly? It's really important to, keep this in mind. When it comes to what our deen teaches, we don't make this stuff up. We don't make up I can't twist and change the verses of the Quran. What the Quran says is what the Quran says. I could understand that and internalize it and process it in the proper way, and that's, I think, what we seek. And it's not like sort of twisting words or playing games with the teachings of Allah. No. Whenever it comes to dealing with people, I need to understand that my deen teaches me that I need to wear different caps. Different caps. You know what I mean by different caps? There is one cap that is the da'wah cap, if you want to call it. Basically, how should I present people a message in a way that they could digest and accept? Because really that's the end goal. Because the Prophet ﷺ himself had to deal with tons of people who had things that were fundamentally wrong about how they chose to live their lives. People who are engaging in kaba'ir and major sins, right? So how could you win over the hearts of people? That's one thing. So some people, when it comes to this issue, they're very hard-nosed and hard-line, and they're going to be punished in hell, and they deserve this and they deserve that, and these people are morally bankrupt and so on. But that type of rhetoric, what impression does it leave on the hearts? That's the da'wah cap. That's the da'wah cap, right? And Islam teaches us to be very mindful of how to deal with someone who we see is perhaps away from what is pleasing from him or her in their relationship with Allah, and is doing something that we believe is damaging to their humanity, right? So that's the da'wah cap. The other cap is my personal practice and my personal understanding, the fiqh of it. What happened to Qawm Lut? We know what happened to Qawm Lut. There are people whom Allah Azza wa Jal punished. And the reason why they were punished is because they did a host of things that led them down to the path of their own demise. At the top of this is what was repeated in multiple verses, as Allah Azza wa Jal describes, was then doing an aberrancy that has not been brought forward by any nation before. And that's what the Quran describes. أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. You're doing an obscenity that the nations before you did not dare do. And what is that obscenity? We need more specificity, because people again are saying, like you say, the Quran doesn't talk about it, right? The exact verse is أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَهْوَةً مِنْ دُونِ النِّسَاءِ. Are you coming towards your same gender? In this case, it's mentioning men. How are you coming to them? In lust. شَهْوَةً مِنْ دُونِ النِّسَاءِ. All right? And then he describes this is a crime. This is a form of israf and transgression against the soul. That's my personal understanding cap, right? So there's the da'wah cap, there's my personal understanding, the fiqh tier, basically you could say the hard facts about the issue from the standpoint of Islamic law. And then the other thing is the social cap. That's the third cap I would add to this. We live in a society that has a certain nature. Where do Muslims fit in that very diverse pool that is our society? Right? There are three different issues. You know what? When you look at things like this, it gives you a different approach. Right? Our deen teaches us nuance. You guys know what nuance is? What's nuance? What's nuance? Huh? Subtlety, right? Looking at things in detail, right? You could look at something and just say, oh, well, that's the door. Or you could go in more detail, oh, that's a wooden door with aesthetic design that looks like this, and so on and so forth. I started looking at the details that are beyond that. There's a beautiful example. Have you ever heard of the story of the men and the elephant? You ever heard of that one?
Vaguely, it's been a while.
Who's heard of this example before? The men and the elephant. Anyone heard of this before? The blind men and the elephant. The blind men and the elephant. All right, there was a group of blind men, right? There was one person who could see, then the other ones were blind. They were touching different parts of the elephant. One of them touched the tusk and said, this animal has a very, very firm or very hard part of its body. And then someone else touched the tail and said, this animal has a very short tail. Someone else touched the stomach and said, wow, this animal has a massive stomach, right? Another one touched the ears and said, this animal has massive ears, right? Are any of them wrong? Are they wrong in what they're describing? But they're describing what they're experiencing from the reality of this elephant. And because of their blindness, they can't describe anything more than that, right? And then this person who's observing this scene could see a bigger picture, right? That's what our deen teaches us to, a bigger picture, right? Look at things with nuance. Just step back. It's not black and white. Most issues in life are not black and white. So that's part of what I hope we could walk away with from this subject. Wallahu alam. I guess that's
okay.
how I would address that.
So I think you're talking about when you start to approach the Quran about this issue in the first place, because I was bringing it up, is one, to think about looking at these things from these three different nuanced angles or caps. You're looking at one, the dawah cap, one being your personal understanding. We'll start with the personal understanding cap. Two would be the dawah cap. Three would be the social cap. And to look at things from that nuanced perspective, that's the way you should start to approach this thing in the first place, and not to get worried about that. Okay, so actually, I was kind of thinking, that's why I was asking if you wanted to start with the Quran. I think then after we should build some of that, then maybe we can get back to the Quran then on it if you want. And we'll
Sure.
go from there. Okay.
Sure.
So I guess then to start from the overall point of view about the
Just
still
keep
too low?
Keep
Okay,
it
sorry.
close to you. Stop
Okay.
dancing around with it.
So I guess we'll start with the concept of just this sin in general. So, and I think you're making a point here. I think one of the interesting points I noticed, at least, is there's this strong aversion from the Pride Month community, we'll call it that, about Islam's views sometimes, or just about people's views about why are you discriminating against this one group or anything like that. One thing I thought was important to notice is that we know, I think there's a difference between how we do it versus the Ahl Kitab doing it, right? At least in today's day, where yes, they are kind of picking that sin, it seems like, and honing in on it. Whereas we're a little bit more consistent. It seems like we're like, no, this is one sin, but we're just as, we are just as firm in our beliefs in all the other sins, all the other sexual relationships that are illicit and things like that. That's different. So, is there, and I guess the question would just be, is there a difference between this other sins that we are thinking about or worrying about what is the right way to live and this specific LGBT issue in Islam?
Okay, so Jazakallah khair for the question. By the way, we got a lot of comments coming in, mashallah, if you could look through them. But in the meantime, what is the sin exactly? Since you kept on referencing sin, let me start with that. The sin, is it the desire? If I say yes, someone might say, well, how could Allah hold me accountable for something I'm feeling on the inside, just a desire, when that's not applied to any other type of desire in Islam? Say if you're a young brother here right now, and you want to get married, but you can't right now, but you keep on thinking about lustful thoughts, and are you going to get sins just for the thought and the desire come into your heart? If the answer is yes, most people will be ruined, right? The answer is no. There's a difference between a desire and an attraction and acting upon that desire and that attraction. They're two separate issues. So, is having an attraction to the same gender something sinful in itself, that you're committing a sin and you're going to be quote unquote punished by Allah for that? No, the answer to this is no. Allah, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Allah has relieved my ummah from things they feel in their heart. Of course, unless it becomes something, as long as it's hadith nafs, just a passing thought. As long as it doesn't become something their heart sets on and is actually followed through by action, they're not going to be punished for those passing thoughts that come inside. So that's about the attraction, because some people really might find this as a test from Allah, and they might be rewarded for actually managing those negative thoughts. Just as someone who can't get married, a brother or a sister who has negative thoughts in their mind about things that they would like to do but are absolutely haram for them to do, they would get a reward if they push away those thoughts. So that in itself is something, the act is what is haram. Actually acting upon same-sex attractions, acting upon it in terms of being in a relationship, or actually experiencing some type of form of sexual expression. In that sense, that's haram. Being in an illicit relationship or acting upon it in some other way, that's something prohibited. Now, when it comes to this, you said sin. We see it as a sin, right? And this is by consensus. This is something that our deen teaches. It's not like a difference of opinion, even though we have a growing movement among Muslims who are coming out and presenting themselves as gay Muslims. So we have this as a growing presence there. But in terms of what our deen teaches, we absolutely believe it's a sin. And it compares just to the other sins as well. So just as being in the haram heterosexual relationship would be the same thing in terms of its sinfulness. If someone is has a boyfriend or a girlfriend and it comes into some physical contact or has some other type of sexual expression, that's also something that is prohibited. And the reason why that is, where do we get what we deem pleasant and what we deem wicked? Where do we get that from? This is what we call tahseen and taqbih. Alcohol. Is there any benefit in alcohol, wine and alcohol? What do you guys think? Is there any benefit? You're saying some benefit? Some sisters said yes as well. There's benefit in some alcohol, right? You'll find some medical benefits for it? Okay. Now, if my mind is the end-all, be-all for everything, then what's going to happen? You're going to walk away with 100 different opinions on whether people should have any access to alcohol or not. You're going to have a whole lot of opinions. Same thing with when it comes to having interaction with the opposite gender. A brother might tell you, well, no, we're just friends. Or a sister might say, well, no, I could control myself. Another person will say, well, that's not me when it comes to being in complete seclusion with the opposite gender, which is something that's prohibited in our deen. But then, if it was left to my mind, then what would happen? We would have no law. We would have no sharia. But Allah Azza wa Jalla is the one who gives us guidance on what's pleasant, what's okay, what's good, what's in line with the fitrah and what's not. Right? So for us as Muslims, to your point, we don't single out this issue actually. We actually apply it to all things. Any form of sexual expression outside of what Allah has made halal is something that's prohibited upon me. And there's wisdoms behind that and wisdom in that. And inshallah we can talk about that more later on. But this is the real important thing. I guess one of the biggest blunders of society is that promiscuity in general is on the rise in our society. When you look at how society is in terms of sexual expression today, in comparison to 100 years ago, it's a completely different world. In terms of what people watch on TV, the subject of pornography, and even just the movies and the TV shows and the revealing clothes, and you guys see it in this time of the year where the beaches are littered with nudity, and where even cartoons are just full of just such sexual notions. That is on every bracket of society. So when you come to single out the issue of the LGBTQ movement, it doesn't make any sense. It'd be like, okay, well, why are you being unfair? Why are you being judgmental? Why are you criticizing other people and not allowing them to express their sexuality, and so on and so forth? So that's how I would address that question. Allah.
Jazakallah khair. I think I'll take one of the questions from the audience. It's a good follow-up then to this. So I think one of the summaries here is that, and I think everyone has heard this at some level before, the idea of the thought isn't the sin, the action is the sin. I think everyone's heard this at some level, basically. So I guess then there's the Dubaru question, and if that's not obvious to someone, please ask the question. But I think everyone's heard that at some level. The thought's not the sin, it's just the action. But then there's the argument that's brought up a lot of times, well, they're biologically inclined to do X, Y, or Z. And someone's asking, so their non-Muslim friends say that if they don't have exceptions for people who are already biologically determined that way, isn't Islam oppressive in the first place? And I guess then even just a deeper question than someone who's not Muslim might ask is, what does that say about their religion if they're saying this action is wrong when it's a biological inclination that Allah gave them in the first place. So even if the thought is, it's not the thought that's haram, it's just the action. Like, well, then, but why would why would Allah give those thoughts to them if it was wrong in the first place?
So there's actually a beautiful line of poetry by Imam al-Busiri that kind of addresses this issue. He says, وَالنَّفْسُ كَالطِّفْلِ إِن تُهْمِلْهُ شَبَّ عَلَى حُبِّ الرَّضَاعِ وَإِن تَفْطِمْهُ يَنْفَطِمِ. He says that your nafs is just like a child. If you get your child used to or attached to breastfeeding, then that will be prolonged beyond its normal period. And if you actually take the effort to wean the child off of breastfeeding, the child will be weaned, right? This idea of us being biologically inclined towards this or that, and then they'll start bringing examples from animals. There are certain animals that interact with each other sexually in a homosexual manner, and all this stuff like that. This is nonsense. In our deen, we see this as absolute nonsense. Behavior is something that is trained. That's what we firmly believe. Human beings are very social creatures, and we often start mimicking the behavior of those around us. If you're around angry people all the time, guess what? You might very easily become a short-fused person and become very angry and just shout and yell all the time, because that's what you're used to seeing, right? If you're around people that act in a certain manner, you will get those characteristics. Al-akhlaqu mu'diya. Character is contagious, right? That's our belief. In terms of the aberrancies in people's sexual expression, this happens in terms of what you see on TV. Look what you see on TV today. Because this has become there's society-wide acceptance for this issue. You go even sometimes watch cartoons or kid shows and you find certain elements in it. They just have to push it in there. There has to be some type of love relationship. And now it's not just a love relationship that's there, even in these kids shows or cartoons. It's actually a love relationship that is homosexual in nature, right? And when kids get used to seeing that, what do you think they're going to be inclined to accept as they grow up? That's one thing. Then when it comes to aberrancies, it starts off with, society, having a certain acceptance for just people like, things that damage people, sexually. When you're talking about masturbation, for example, it's something that's haram in our deen. That could actually distort a person's fitrah. Pornography, that's something that could actually, even is scientifically proven, distorts a person's physical state and physiological state. So when you look at that issue, that's just the beginning of the road of aberrancies. And aberrancy, what do I mean by aberrancies? Distortions of fitrah, shudud. That's what aberrancy means, a distortion of fitrah. Now, it's part of a bigger story. That's what I'm trying to tell you, is, we don't say that for anything else. Oh yeah, imagine a kid going to his mother and saying, Mom, I'm sorry, I always yell at you and fight back. I have this biological inclination to just be an angry person, and it's not my fault that I'm an angry person. It's just who I am. And you just need to accept me for who I am. I know I'm not as calm as other people, and I'm angry. Would someone accept that type of logic? Or you know what? Let me go to some shab. I had this. There's a young brother who came and spoke to me. He had a type of sexual addiction, and he could not stop having physical, contact with the opposite gender of a certain nature, and it was an addiction for him. Now, if he says to himself, well, you know what, I just have this biological inclination to it. Why would God punish me for something that He created with me? Some people have more shahwa than others. Is that some type of excuse that I could use? Well, it's not my fault. I have this shahwa and I can't get married and it's just running wild. Well, I'll ask the brother, well, what are you watching? Where are you going? Who are you interacting with? Maybe you're putting yourself always in these areas, these questionable areas that make you inclined towards this type of behavior. We do that with everything else. There's this idea of self-control that needs to be there, even with things that we're naturally inclined to. Someone who is 14, 15, 16, 17 and can't get married and has a biological tendency to be attracted to the opposite gender, guess what? He needs to have self-control. Yeah.
And so I think part of the argument there is the idea of getting into the fitra, and I think probably maybe I think you try to explain that most of this stuff can be explained by there's aberrations of the fitra, and if and just because one has an aberrant personality characteristic, you shouldn't give into it, just like you wouldn't give into anger and just say that's it.
Or you know what, any other, because you know the argument, you know, what's the argument? You know, let me ask you guys, anyone, if you guys want to ask directly, you know, how would you think someone might argue back against that? What would you think they would say? Anyone have the courage to raise their hand and answer that directly, besides you? Huh? Yeah, so I just said what I said about, you know, biological tendencies towards other things that are haram, but we need to have self-control. That's our answer to that type of question, where just because you think you have a biological inclination towards something, doesn't mean you could just go ahead and do it. What would you think the response to that would be?
I think the response would be, well, you have the opportunity to marry someone.
Okay, so he said it. Exactly, that's what I was thinking. You guys heard what he said? You guys heard what he said? He said, well, you guys, if you have an attraction to the opposite gender, you have a means to fulfill it in a halal way. I don't. You know, this is a real test for some people. Oh, am I supposed to be lonely for the rest of my life? I can't fulfill my desire. You can. There are certain things that a person might desire that he can or she can never get. There are certain things that a person might desire that he or she can never get. And their only road is to be patient. What do I mean? Like some person might have been set on getting married to another, and Allah willed that the guy got married to someone else, and the sister is very sad and sorrowed by the circumstance, and now he is with another woman, and she just needs to figure out a way to move past this desire and attachment towards this person, which, you know what, by the way, it's a very real thing. It's not just something you could just undermine and, you know, say, oh, well, that's not, how could you argue back with that? Because you know what, that derails, and I've seen it with firsthand with a lot of people, that derails a lot of people. They set their whole hopes and dreams that my life needs to be with fulan or fulana. And if it doesn't happen, that's it, I'm going to be depressed, my life's ruined. Years of their life will pass and they can't get past it. They can't get past it. Some people, it's that serious, you know. And sometimes some people get suicidal. Some people get suicidal. You would be surprised that they get so attached to this person that they want to be with but can't be with for X, Y, or Z reason. It could be that person got married to someone else. It could be that person is not halal for me to get married to because, for example, they're not Muslim or from Ahlul Kitab, from the people of the book. They might be from another religion. And you know what? There's this attachment, this desire. I can't fulfill it. This is not fair. The person might become suicidal. And I've seen this firsthand where someone says that I'm going to hurt myself if you leave me and if you don't stay in this relationship. I've seen this, you know, so that's my response to that. There are certain things in life you would not be able to fulfill your desire based on, but your only route to dealing with it is self-control. And Allah Azza wa Jalla will reward for that greatly. Someone who has an intense attraction to the opposite gender. There's tons of people who don't even get married, to be honest. You know what? In some of our Muslim countries, the trial is so great that, there are millions of people who pass their prime, I guess you could say, without ever being approached in the issue of marriage. Either if they're a guy, they don't have the finances or the abilities, so Allah might have tested them with the inability to have, sexual relations, or Allah might have tested them with poverty, and they can't fulfill what their heart desires, and they can't find it. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Some sisters, I've lived in Egypt for many years, and I know that this is a big problem there, where the reality is so deteriorating that there are millions of women who pass their prime and are never asked for in marriage at all. Never asked for, and that's a really big test. So no one could try to take this cookie cutter approach and make it seem, well, this is the only thing in life where there's absolutely no way for me to get what I want. There's tons of things like that in life. Tons of things. Well, that would be my response to that.
So, and to add to that, I think one of the things that and I guess I want to ask, this is the right way to think about it. I mean, part of it is, again, I think an acceptance that there are going to be some laws and tests in this life that might not be easy for us, and in general, that's part of the test in general. I don't know, this approach I always tell people whenever they have, when they talk about anything, a topic about, like, well, what about homosexuality, what about X, Y, or Z? I was wondering if you wanted to comment whether this is a good way to approach that. I always say, we don't believe because of the rules, that we start by saying, is this from a law? Then if that's the case, then we believe that, and then if that's the case, then we should go and follow the rules, right? The Samana wa Ta'ana thing. But the concept people are starting from looking at the rules to look at if they like it or not. Well, then what's the point of there being rules if it was just what we already liked or didn't like in the first place, right? So just wanted to comment if that's a good way to be, especially from this dawah cap perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, look, take a look at this. Everything what we've been discussing here, what you're talking about is about whims and being a whimsical person. By the way, just to clarify, we want to take a step back and look at bigger picture again. What have we been, all of this that we've been saying now, this is under which cap? We mentioned 3 caps, right, in the beginning. We mentioned you guys remember them? The da'wah cap, the social cap, and then the personal cap, right? What we've been saying here, this type of rhetoric is coming from which cap? The personal, right? Someone might just walk in at this part of the discussion and be like, whoa, that person's really fired up. And if someone hears about Islam in this manner, they'll run for the high hills, right? But in actuality, we would never present this to someone who's actually going through the struggle in this manner. This is just to be real about the fact of the matter. Because when it comes to distortion of facts, that's something that is a big problem. It's one thing if someone wants to believe something else. The Quran says it, قُلْ آمِنُوا بِهِ أَوْ لَا تُؤْمِنُوا. You either believe or don't believe. It's your choice. People have that choice to believe or not believe. That's for them. But when it comes to being shoved down people's throats, and you have to accept this and accept it as superior and scientific, and if you don't, then you're a backwards person. You're a person who's hardline, and you lack understanding and compassion. When it comes presented like that, it's seriously problematic. And that's exactly our issue with the way that the LGBTQ plus movement is approaching this issue. If you don't do certain things, you might end up losing opportunities in your job. You might be passed on certain promotions. You might, if you have a public office, you would be shamed out of that public office. You would be forced to make public apologies if you express your personal beliefs on an issue, right? This type of rhetoric that, is something that society now has absolutely stood against. And we believe that that's absolutely not fair. So this is all under the personal cap. When it comes to dealing with someone who believes in this, no, I got water, Jazakallah khair. When it comes to dealing with someone who believes in this or someone who's a homosexual, then I need to deal in a completely different fashion. I need to make sure that I give that person their space to make their own convictions. I can't compel people because Allah says La ikraha fid deen. There's no compulsion in religion. People choose for themselves. In alayka illa al-balagh. Your responsibility is to just convey the message and to be dutiful to the message in your own right. That's what I could do, right? When it comes to dealing with people who are homosexuals, does our deen teaches us to dehumanize any person? Does it? Right? You guys know the story about the companion who used to get intoxicated time and time again, and the Prophet would hold him accountable. And you guys know this story? The companion who would get intoxicated? How many of you know it? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Some people know it. All right. Be surprised, the companions were human beings. This companion had an issue with alcohol. He would get drunk. And he'd be brought to the Prophet ﷺ, and he's not in his right state of mind. And one time, the companions began reprimanding him and striking him and hitting him. What are you doing? What are you doing getting publicly intoxicated like this? So the Prophet ﷺ said to this companion who cursed at this man, don't curse him. لا تلعنوه فإنه يحب الله ورسوله. He's someone who in his heart loves Allah and His Prophet. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said to them, لا تكونوا عونا للشيطان على أخيكم. Don't be an aid to the shaitan against your brother. That's the da'wah cap, right? If someone acts upon homosexual tendencies, do they leave the folds of Islam? What's your answer to this question? If someone, the one person answered here, said no. I want to hear the answer from all of you guys. If someone acts upon homosexual tendencies, do they leave Islam? No. Okay. Just as someone who fornicates, do they leave Islam? Jazakallah khair. Barakallah feek. Another coffee? MashaAllah. Thank you so much. Just as someone who fornicates, do they leave Islam? No. When does someone actually, their faith is at risk? When is their faith at risk? When someone tries to make something that is categorically prohibited as something that is utterly accepted. You might have someone who says, I can't help myself. I'm looking at haram things, pornographic things, I can't help myself. I know I'm wrong, and I hope Allah forgives me. That's one attitude. Someone who says, about, for example, riba, interest. Oh, I know it's not allowed, but I know I'm slacking in this regard. I really shouldn't be doing this, but I don't know. I don't have another type of job. It's something that deals with some type of interest. Is that person going to leave Islam? If someone starts saying, you know what? Riba being haram is absolute nonsense. How are we going to get ahead as Muslims in life if we don't deal with interest in riba? That's absolute nonsense. That's stuff from the old days. Riba should be okay today. That person leaves Islam. Someone who says, you know what, doesn't make sense. Why should people be restricted to marriage? As long as they're two consenting adults, they should be able to do whatever they want. Who are they hurting? Right? If someone says that, what happens? They leave the folds of Islam. If someone says, you know what, this thing, acting upon homosexual tendencies, absolutely nothing sinful about it in terms of Islam. Absolutely halal. That person, if it's clarified to them that Islam teaches X, Y, Z, and they still insist upon it, that would also be something that threatens. So it's very important to distinguish between these matters, because you can't just go to someone who does a certain act and say, well, you're not a Muslim, or you can't be a Muslim because you do this or you do that. No. Islam doesn't teach us to be that loose in kicking people out of Islam, right? So, wallahu alam.
Okay, and I'm looking at the questions here. There's a few almost all the questions are about how to deal with the movements and the world that we're in with it. But so very few questions are left about like, what about, why is it haram? What do we believe about it? So I think I think
the questions here. Does anyone have any question that they'd like to ask directly? We have one right there. Go ahead. Well, the question he asked, just so everyone hears it, is what's the response if someone tries to misconstrue what Allah says about the people of Lut as being something that's in the form of rape, not between two consenting adults? The response to this is the verse of the Quran is general, and for one to try to twist the words in that fashion, there's nothing that suggests that. There's nothing that mentions ightisab or ikrah in that type of regard. It says, do you approach men, addressing men, do you approach men out of shahwa? It's maf'ul li ajlih, for the purpose of shahwa and desire. And then it says, you are a people of great ignorance. You are a people of great aggression. That's what the verse says in its variation. So, how can you misconstrue that and say it's about rape? You can't. It's talking about lust and desire. That's the exact wording of it. So that's our response to that claim. It's reading into the words something that isn't actually said. Wallahu alam. Yeah.
Do you want to go from the audience or what do you want to do next, or from the phone?
Does anyone else have something that they'd like to ask? Go ahead. Is it okay to be friends with someone who's gay? Friendly. Friendly, of course, that's jazakallah khair, it's a really good question. Yeah, don't dehumanize anyone who commits any type of sin. You can be friendly with every single human being. That's something that Allah Azza wa Jal says directly in the Quran. He says, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. Allah loves those who are just and upright. There's nothing at all wrong with being kind and friendly with a person that you don't necessarily have the same beliefs as. I think there's an extension to this question. Of course, this is one of the things there. But what do you think our stance should be about dealing with the LGBTQ plus movement? What do you think our stance should be in that regard? So that's a big question. And that, brings us to, I guess you could say some political alliances and social alliances on common causes. What do you guys think? How would you address that issue? If someone asks you that question, is it okay to become allies with the LGBTQ movement on certain causes? What would your answer to that be? Go ahead, Ahmed, Umar. طيب, okay. All right, so we wouldn't accept their personal beliefs. Come on, I want to hear some more opinions. What if they, you're on a college campus and you're approached and, hey, we want to make a Gay Pride for Palestine parade. Method. I don't know if this actually happened anywhere, but Gay Pride for Palestine parade. Do you guys want to join us as an MSA? What would you guys say to this? Yalla, raise your hands. I want to hear from you guys. What do you guys think? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. I want to hear from someone. Are you going to tell me your opinion and why? What do you think? Anyone? Go ahead. They're going to be like, oh, you want me to support your cause when you're not supporting mine? I'll tell you what some Muslim activists might say. Well, if you're not for the rights of all minorities, then you're not going to be for the rights of any minorities. That's exactly what they argue. Some Muslim activists say this right now. They say, well, if we want people to support the cause of Palestine, then how can we not support other minorities? So what would the response to that type is this type of thinking sound? I want to hear your opinions. Go ahead, Abdul Samad. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So basically, you're saying it's sound because the political arena is something that's very complex, and sometimes these types of things would be used, to pull you into certain different directions that will end up going against your causes and your beliefs. Okay, I want to hear from other people as well. Any sisters want to share their opinions? What do you think? Should Muslims ally with the LGBTQ community when it comes to common causes, when it comes to issues of racism, mathalan, or social justice, or Palestine, or something else? Anyone want to share their opinion? With Arabic? No, it has to be in English. So everyone else could understand. Okay. Okay. Tamam, yani we don't need them because just like the hypocrites retreated in Uhud, we don't need. Okay, that's one opinion. تفضل Shaykh Ali. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, Jazakallah khair. So the issue with normalization and how do we do that? So look, you guys said some good things, all of you guys. Barakallah fikum. I would say one of the biggest challenges down this road is if I'm not someone who's clear on my values and my principles and what my deen teaches, it could be very easy for me to be swept away by one ideology or another. And when people get involved in activism and they don't have solid foundations in Islam's teachings, then you'll find that their name might be Muhammad, Zaid, or Fatima, but that's as far as it goes. They get, and actually to that point about politics, for us as a Muslim community, it's not just about getting Muhammad, Zaid, or Fatima in a position, right? If their position or who they become as a person absolutely doesn't represent what we as a community are trying to achieve. To what end, right? So anyway, politics is really complex. It's not a black and white thing, to some of your points. But the scary thing to me is, human beings in general, are emotional creatures. You build a bond with someone and you become friends and you see, oh, this person's a pleasant person. And because of emotion, that might heavily impact my judgment, right? Oh, why would God punish this type of person? He seems like a nice guy. He's friendly. He's generous. He does good things for people. I know tons of Muslims who are way more lousy than this guy. Why on earth would that person be deserving of Jannah and this person not? And then it becomes confusing because of the emotional struggle it causes inside. So my advice in this regard is not to give a clear black and white answer, but just pay attention. This subject teaches us we need to be very clear about our Islam and what our Islam is. And that's the biggest takeaway in all of this stuff. And what we advise our children and what we should speak about in terms of school. There's something very clear. When it comes to celebrating something that displeases Allah, my deen tells me that that's not something allowed. My deen tells me that society is not founded upon individualism. That's a new idea. That's a Western idea. You guys know Western philosophical values. We're fed Western philosophical values in every aspect of our being, and what we watch, and how we play and have fun, and in sports and entertainment. All of that stuff is teaching us certain values. Don't be judgmental, right? Each person's religion is for themselves, right? Religion is a private thing. It's not a public thing. We separated religion from politics long ago, right? So just give me a few minutes. So looking at it further, what I'm trying to say here is, those Western philosophical values might be distorting my understandings of what Islam teaches, how society functions. Society, is it individualistic in nature, or should it be individualistic in nature? What do I mean? Like, our society teaches that the role of government, law, civilization is expand the rights of the individual as much as possible, as long as it doesn't transgress against other individuals. But what Islam teaches is there is a two-way relationship between the individual and society, meaning that what I choose for myself might have a detrimental, corrosive impact on society as a whole. We're in this together. You guys heard of the hadith of the Safina, the boat? You guys heard? How many of you heard of the hadith of the ship? Raise your hand. You guys know what I'm talking about? Most of you don't. The hadith basically says there was like the example of those who enjoin good and forbid evil is like the example of a people on a ship. Some of them are on the upper deck. Some of them are on the lower deck. The people on the upper deck are the only ones who have access to the water. The people on the lower deck don't have any access. They need to go to the people on the upper deck. If the people on the upper deck leave them to their choices and do nothing about their need to access water, then what's going to happen? The people on the lower deck, what are they going to do? Are you going to, all right, you know what? I don't want to keep on going to the upper deck and asking them for water. They're not going to give us, or what? I'm just going to poke a hole right here in the bottom of this boat, and I'm going to get water directly, right? If the people on the upper deck leave them alone to do whatever they want, what's going to happen? They're going to drown, and not just one of them is going to drown. They're all going to drown, right? So that's what Islam teaches. that's why, some people think when it comes to issues between gender, men and women, the way that Islam teaches us to dress, the subject of haya and modesty, the idea of lowering gaze, we're going to get to this issue on another day. Some sisters might be like, why should I have to cover myself because some other guys can't control themselves? That should be their responsibility. That's not my responsibility. That's their fault that they can't lower their gaze, right? Why? Oh, so is Islam trying to restrict, prohibit, compel people to a certain direction? No. It's a realization that my actions actually influence society as a whole. And society as a whole makes me who I am as well. It's a two-way relationship, right? So that's to that question, about allying. In short, our biggest problem as a community is we are not clear on the principles of our Islam. In general, many of us don't know enough. And when we get into activism, the lines get blurred and it becomes very confusing. And people start becoming accepting of certain things that Allah Azza wa Jalla has categorically prohibited. Allah Alam. Go ahead.
So there's an incredible amount of questions. I think we could do a whole nother day of just Q&A on these questions that are here, I think. I don't know how much time we're going to have left, so there's at least one question I want to ask for myself. So can I be selfish and ask it now, or should we do some of the Q&A?
Tfaddal.
Okay. So I do want to just get into the Quran a little bit. So I think on this concept of the dawah hat and the way you present, and I think now we've talked about like what is our belief system, and we're kind of down to the second part, which is how do we deal with the reality of the world today and things like that. So we talk about the nuance and that you should be, wise in how you look at things. And then, so someone like me who, I think a little bit more in this more simple, straightforward way, right? Especially not from the non-scholarly class. I think there's a lot in the community like me. So like, for example, I think it's worth like, when I read how Allah describes how Lut dealt with the issue, right? So for example, I'll just give like one of the examples, right? And you mentioned pieces of how he had said it, I think too. But like it says, it's like, okay, I'm looking at how did Lut, the prophet, say it? And the way he dealt with it, the Quran says, do you commit the fahisha while you see? Do you indeed approach men with desire rather than women? Rather, you're an ignorant people. And then the answer of the people was not except that they said, expel the family of Lut from your city. And the point I just want to make real quick here is, it's like, someone like me might look at it like, well, if the Quran had said, and Lut said, let me step back and, be calm with it, maybe I would have done that way. But like I'm reading it and it seems like it's a very simple, it's a simplistic reading, but it seems like it's a simplistic answer of, there's a stern way that the example was given before us, right?
Yeah.
So how would you answer people like us that we read that in a simple way like that?
Jazakallah khair, good question. It actually brings me to, we're talking about Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam today. Ibrahim alayhi salam is a person who, loved human beings. He was invested in humanity. And that's because he was a person who was invested in family. That's something, empathy is something that's learned, right? People learn to be empathetic towards each other. How should we express disagreement? That's really what the question is here. Like those people who approach this issue, burn them at the stake, throw them from the highest mountain, and they want to be like very hardline about the issue. That's not what Islam teaches. Look at this, take a look at this. The same story, Surah Hud, Ibrahim alayhi salam says something. When the angels came to Ibrahim and they told him the people of Lut are going to be destroyed, what did he say? فَلَمَّا ذَهَبَ عَنْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ الرَّوْعُ وَجَاءَتْهُ الْبُشْرَى يُجَادِلُنَا فِي قَوْمِ لُوطٍ Ibrahim alayhi, and inna Ibrahim lahalimun awwahun munib. Allah says that Ibrahim alayhi salam began pleading with the angels, don't rush to punish them. The Prophet was the same way. He was not a person who wished punishment and ruin upon people. That's the da'wah cap, right? That's the social cap. Yeah, there are certain aspects where we really need to have a genuine desire of goodness for people, even though we're clear on our values. How should we express disagreement? I don't want to be forced to this. I don't want my children to be coerced into accepting this in the educational system. That's not fair. You can't shove it down our throats. But at the same time, I'm invested in humanity. I don't wish ruin upon people. Ibrahim alayhi salam was trying to give them some type of muhla. Give them time. Lut is still there. How could you punish them when Lut is there? How could you punish them when there's some believers among them? Right? So don't rush and punish them. يُجَادِلُنَا فِي قَوْمِ لُوطٍ Inna Ibrahim al-Halim. Ibrahim was a person of forbearance and a person who would return all affairs back to Allah. That's why Allah Azza wa Jal told him, he was told after this, Ya Ibrahim a'rid an hadha. That's it. This is not for you to debate about. Their fate has been sealed. Right? So that's the other storyline to it that I hope we walk away with from here. Now, you might deal with people, and I've had to be in this type of situation a few times, where I tried my best to convince someone, that their feelings and the way they want to express their feelings, their attraction to the same gender, is something that's damaging. It's not good for them. There's a reason why we have desires. It's for the purpose of procreation and tanasul. That's why we have desires. To express it in a way that'll fulfill us, actually. And you know what? If you do that through any means of haram, it will not fulfill you. It'll lead to more depression and anxiety. And you know what? By the way, you're going to find this statistic out there. The statistics on depression among the LGBTQ plus community, and between the statistics among people in general, people with family issues, people with other issues with other types of sins like pornography, right? When you go try to fulfill yourself through a haram means, it is a bottomless pit. There's no end to it. It'll not give you true happiness. They'll try to project and say, well, no, that's because people discriminate against them. That's why they're depressed. That's why they feel the way they feel. They feel suppressed and inferior. But in actuality, our belief is, no, that's not the case. That's not the case. You will not find true happiness in existence in something that is utterly and fundamentally contrary to the natural design, Allah's design. You won't. Whether it's in this issue or any other issue. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. That's what I would say. The Quranic response is, look at Ibrahim alayhi salam. He loved human beings. We should love human beings too. Whether they believe in what we believe in or not, we should want with a heart full of sincerity that Allah helps everyone struggling with a sin or a vice or whatever it might be at heart. Wallahu a'lam.
Okay, just like okay. How much longer do you want to go for, by the way?
We just have a few more minutes.
Okay.
Anyone have any comments, any direct comments or questions? Sister, raise her hand. Go ahead. Yeah, Jazakallah khair for drawing. So being friendly is one thing, and being invested in a friendship is another thing. The Prophet, there's a statement that says, لا تصحب إلا مؤمنا ولا يأكل طعامك إلا تقي. This doesn't just apply to this issue, by the way, it applies to everything. And that's the beautiful thing about our deen. We don't pick and choose our values. It applies across the board. Don't befriend except someone who's a true believer. That's because character is contagious. You're going to be influenced in somehow, in some way or fashion, by a person's beliefs, another person's beliefs and behaviors, right? And وَلَا يَأْكُلْ طَعَامَكَ إِلَّا تَقِي. Don't invite into your close circle, into your home, except someone who is fearing of Allah Azza wa Jal. وَلَا يَأْكُلْ طَعَامَكَ إِلَّا تَقِي. Who do you choose to have in your company? That's going to speak volumes to who you become as a person. So absolutely, Jazakallah khair. I agree with this comment wholeheartedly. Be friendly, but make sure in your relationships. Same thing if you know someone with a drug addiction. If you choose to always be around that type of person, it's going to have its own certain impact on who you become. That's a da'wah relationship. There's a da'wah relationship and then there's a friendship. There's two separate things. Anyone? I think someone else had their... Go ahead. what's the best way to react to someone who's younger, like 8 or 9 years old, who says, I have friends who are homosexual? I would, carefully, I guess, nudge this person to having a better support system around them. Just going to that point. Who do you want around you? Well, I could do this in an indirect way. Who's your support system? Let me find for my cousin or my brother or my sister people who actually will help them become better versions of themselves. I don't think you necessarily need to confuse them with the whole in and outs of, what's homosexuality and why are we against it and this and that, ومش عارف إيه. But just give better alternatives and try yourself to be a better friend or a better older brother for these younger kids and bring them to something better. Bring them to the masjid. Bring them to halaqas, classes, where they could start experiencing something new. Because that's where the downfall starts happening, when the person lives a life that's completely away from the house of Allah, completely away from the idea of community and all the rest. Wallahu a'lam. That's what I would advise with that. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Can we not extrapolate from that period, from that example, that Allah hasn't changed His mind about that type of behavior? Therefore, we can conclude logically that the people who continue in such behavior are an extension of the people of Lut. Their fate is also sealed unless they repent and change their ways.
So, Jazakallah khair, good question. Can't we take from Allah's response to Ibrahim alayhi salam that anyone who does this type of behavior, Allah has a clear stance against them? The response to this is, those people that had this behavior had Prophet Lut, who was specifically sent to them, and he wasn't from them. He was with Ibrahim, he left Ibrahim and he went to the people of Lut with a message. And only after they incessantly rejected this message did this punishment come to them. Now, when you try to apply this to other times and places, many people have fundamental misconceptions about who they are, their purpose and their identity. They need someone who fills the role of Prophet Lut. They need messengers, they need emissaries, they need people who are good citizens who will show them an alternative and show them a different type of rhetoric that might help them on a personal level. That's what we're talking about. So it's not for us right now as non-prophets, after revelation has been complete, to wish for doom upon people. That's something that's by divine intervention. But what our role is to be those messengers to people. And that's what this whole topic's about. Wallah, that would be my response. Someone who didn't ask anything yet. Anyone or any comment? Go ahead. Yeah, it's one of the great trials of our time. I know it's like, when you're in a reality where you need to deal with people of different faiths and values and beliefs, sometimes it's so muhrij. It really tests your beliefs and your values, right? Just hold on 1 second, don't worry, we're going to finish. أنت مستعجل علينا أستاذ رضوان ولا؟ Okay, ماشي, don't worry. So it becomes so muhrij, and I know it's not easy to deal with. But I would find some way. The issue with the pronouns we're going to discuss when we go over transgenderism. It's not really relating to homosexuality. We're going to go discuss it another day. And gender identity. But in general, I would try to be very clear on our values and our principles. And, you know, I'm not trying to disrespect a person. Maybe I'll just call them by their name instead of he or she. If it's something that's going to threaten your job, and if it's something that's going to threaten your job, then obviously you should not put your livelihood at risk. However, if it's not, and I think perhaps it's probably not, you know, then I could try to find some way to at least avoid the subject. Right? I'm not going to get into that. It's being pushed to start to discuss this as a class, or to, you know, well, maybe I just won't have that. If possible, I won't have that type of discussion, and I'll just move on with my curriculum without getting too much into that. I know it's really difficult, but again, that's the barometer. If it's going to threaten my job, then I have no choice but to deal with it within that realm. But if it's not really a threat to my job and I have means of just avoiding the subject altogether, I'm not going to condemn or support. If I could just abstain or find a way to just move on from that issue, then that's what I have to do. Wallahu alam. Yeah. But inshallah, we'll talk more about that when we talk about transgenderism, inshallah. We'll leave that for another day. I know it's time for salah, and the people praying sunnah are like, I got to go home. When is this guy going to stop talking? So we'll stop here and we'll say Subhanakallahumma hamdik nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu salihat wa sahhaku tawasaw sabr. Jazakumullahu khair. Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah for the questions, everybody. Inshallah, I hope there'll be a session at some point in the future. We will get them all. Inshallah, they won't go to waste. Inshallah.